It was a Saturday morning, bright and clear, just the kind of day you'd want for the monumental event in your life. It was 9 a.m. sharp, and I had just crossed a significant milestone, one that I'd worked 4 long years to achieve. The sweat, the long nights, the sacrifices. All of it had led up to this moment. I was standing on the porch of 412 Pine Street, the place that I could now call my own. I had the keys in my hand, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. This house, this beautiful modest 2-bedroom ranch, was finally mine. 4 years ago, I had made a promise to myself. No matter what, I would buy my first home, a place where I could hang my camera equipment, build my career, and maybe even create a family of my own someday. It had been a long journey, with its fair share of hardships, sacrificing vacations, living off ramen noodles, and carefully watching every penny I spent. But now, as I stood there, staring at the house I had worked so hard for, all those years of hard work seemed worth it. The U-Haul truck sat parked in front of the house, packed to the brim with everything I owned. Boxes were stacked high, furniture awkwardly crammed into the back. I carefully started unloading, trying to keep the noise to a minimum for the sake of my new neighbors. I had no idea how they would be, but I wanted to be respectful, show them that I wasn't a bother. I was just trying to start a new chapter of my life. It was during this delicate moment of unloading my belongings that she appeared. At first, I thought she was just a neighbor, maybe someone coming by to introduce herself or offer a friendly hello. But no. What I saw was something much more unsettling. She was marching toward me, clipboard in hand, wearing a red bodysuit and a white skirt that swayed as she walked. The red heels clicked against the asphalt with authority, the sound echoing louder than my own footsteps. She was a woman with a presence, but it was the kind of presence that made you feel uncomfortable, like you were under inspection. I hadn't even had the chance to process her appearance before she stopped right in front of me. "Excuse me." "Stop right there," she commanded, her voice sharp enough to slice through the morning air. Her words were cold, but it wasn't just the command that threw me. It was the way she said it, like I was a criminal, a person who had done something wrong. "I'm Lana Matz, HOA president," she announced, her chest puffing out with a sense of self-importance. "You are not authorized to remove items from this property." It took me a second to fully understand what she was saying. The confusion started to set in as I stood there, holding my 43-inch TV, feeling more and more like a character in a play that I hadn't signed up for. I was moving into my own house. The house I had just bought with all my savings. I had the keys. I had the paperwork. I even had my ID that matched the address. But here I was, being accused of stealing from my own home. The words kept echoing in my mind, stealing from my own home? How does that even happen? I thought I must have misunderstood, but no. She was adamant. With a clipboard raised like a shield, Lana stood between me and my front door, blocking me from getting into my own house. "Ma'am, I just bought this house," I said, still trying to process what was happening. I showed her my keys, my closing documents, my driver's license with the same address. Lana didn't even look at the documents. She waved her hand dismissively, as if I were wasting her time. "Anybody can fake documents these days," she scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "I know for a fact that Mr. Peterson didn't sell this house." And that's when I realized, she wasn't just some concerned neighbor. No, she was a self-proclaimed authority figure, someone who had decided that she could control everything around her. But the funny thing was, she was half right about Mr. Peterson. He had lived here for over 30 years before moving to Florida. But no one had told Lana that little detail. By now, other neighbors had begun to peek out their windows. Dave Thompson from across the street, pretending to check his mailbox, clearly wasn't doing any such thing. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman next door, had her face pressed against the kitchen window, watching this bizarre scene unfold as though she were watching a soap opera. I felt like I was in a bad comedy, one where I had no lines, no script, and no clue how to get out. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any more surreal, Lana pulled out her phone, with a case that matched her red outfit, and dialed 911 with an exaggerated flourish. "I'm calling the police to report a burglary in progress," she announced dramatically, as though she were some kind of neighborhood hero. As she spoke to the dispatcher, describing me, the person with the keys, the papers, and the rightful ownership of the house, as a suspicious individual, I stood there in my practical moving clothes, holding my TV. I had to pinch myself to make sure this was real. As I stood there, watching Lana dial the police, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the absurdity of the situation pressing down on me. I was on my own property, in the middle of moving in, holding the TV I had just purchased for my new home, and yet somehow, I had become the criminal in this bizarre, twisted version of reality. Lana's phone call to the police only intensified the feeling of surreal disbelief. Was this really happening? For a moment, I considered just walking away, telling her she was crazy and retreating inside my house. But something in me snapped. I had worked too damn hard for this house. For years of saving, of sacrifices, of late nights and early mornings. And now, here was this woman in her red outfit and heels, acting as if she had some kind of control over my life, my property, and my very existence. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I pushed it down, knowing that I needed to stay calm. My first priority was making sure this didn't escalate. I set my TV down carefully on the porch, my hands shaking slightly from the stress, and pulled out my phone. I showed her the digital copies of my closing documents. I held up the keys to the house, still warm from my pocket. "Ma'am, these are my keys. This is my house. I have all the paperwork right here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Lana, however, didn't even glance at the evidence. She waved it away with a flick of her wrist, her confidence unwavering. "Anybody can fake documents these days," she repeated, as if she had already made up her mind that I was guilty of some crime I wasn't even aware of. "I know for a fact that Mr. Peterson didn't sell this house." I could feel the blood drain from my face. I didn't even know how to respond to her now. Was she just delusional? Did she really believe what she was saying? And why was she so convinced that I was a criminal? By this point, my new neighbors were clearly watching. Dave Thompson was still pretending to check his mailbox, but I could see the way his eyes kept flicking toward the scene in front of my house. Mrs. Henderson, who had been the first to greet me when I moved in, was now glued to her kitchen window, clearly enjoying the drama that was unfolding. Lana, however, seemed to be enjoying this far more than anyone else. She stood there, blocking my door, her heels clicking on the pavement as she made her presence known. The absurdity of the situation started to feel more and more like some sort of theater. I was the confused audience member, unsure how I had ended up in the middle of this farce. That's when she took it a step further. With a flourish, she pulled out her phone, a red one, of course, and began dialing 911. "I'm calling the police," she declared, her voice loud and dramatic. "This is a burglary in progress." I stared at her, feeling like I was in some twisted dream. Was this woman really about to have me arrested for moving into my own home? The thought was laughable, but at the same time, there was something about her demeanor that made me uneasy. Her self-assurance was both ridiculous and terrifying. As Lana spoke to the dispatcher, describing me, a person simply unloading boxes into his new home, as a suspicious individual, I stood frozen, watching her. My mind raced as I tried to comprehend what was happening. This was my house. I had the keys. I had the documents. But none of that seemed to matter to her. She described me in detail, saying that I was removing property without authorization, as though I had somehow stolen everything I owned. And that's when I realized something else. This wasn't just a case of her being mistaken. No, this was something far worse. Lana wasn't confused, she was orchestrating a performance. She wasn't just a nosy neighbor, she was playing the part of someone who had power, someone who had authority, and she was determined to wield it. As she spoke to the 911 dispatcher, I stood there, helpless, my hands still holding onto the TV, unsure of what to do next. I had no idea if the police would actually show up, or if this was just an empty threat on her part. But the damage was already done. In that moment, I became a suspect in my own life. I glanced around the street, and it was clear that I was no longer the only one involved in this spectacle. My neighbors had begun to peek out from behind curtains, slowly opening their doors to witness what was unfolding. The whole street had become an audience, watching this strange drama play out before their eyes. And then, just as I thought things couldn't get more bizarre, they did. Lana, still holding her phone, turned to walk away. She gave me one last dismissive glance, as if she had just decided she was done with the conversation, her red skirt swishing as she walked. But I didn't take my eyes off her. There was something off about her, something unsettling in the way she carried herself. She wasn't just concerned, she was controlling. She was orchestrating this entire situation like a director, and I was the unwilling actor in her play. For a moment, I thought that would be the end of it. The police would come, sort everything out, and Lana would retreat back to whatever strange life she had created for herself. But no. As I was about to carry on with my move, I got the sense that this was just the beginning. And I was right. The sound of tires on the pavement signaled the arrival of Officer Martinez. His patrol car rolled up slowly, and for the first time since Lana had appeared, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe now, I thought, everything would be set straight. After all, I had the documentation, the keys, and the truth on my side. Surely, this ridiculous misunderstanding would be cleared up. I stood there, waiting for the officer to get out of his car. My heart raced as I tried to maintain a sense of calm. This was my house. I had worked for it. I had earned it. And yet, here I was, standing in front of my own property, as if I were some kind of criminal. Officer Martinez stepped out of the car and glanced at me, then at Lana, who was still standing in the middle of the driveway with her clipboard, looking as though she were leading some sort of official proceeding. It didn't take long for Officer Martinez to assess the situation. He was a professional, after all, and I could see the skepticism in his eyes as he sized up the scene. Lana, of course, didn't waste any time launching into her performance. She began gesturing with her clipboard, her movements overly dramatic as she tried to explain her version of events to the officer. She talked about suspicious activity and property removal without authorization. As she spoke, she glared at me, her eyes narrowed with the intensity of someone who was so deeply convinced of their own righteousness that nothing could shake their belief. I stood there, trying to remain composed, holding the TV in my hands like a prop in a play I never signed up for. Officer Martinez didn't seem to be swayed by her performance, though. He remained calm, his face professional but clearly trying not to smile at the absurdity of the situation. I could tell that he wasn't buying what she was selling. He turned to me, his voice steady. "Can I see your documentation, sir?" I handed over my phone, showing him the digital copies of the closing documents, the proof of purchase, and the keys. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for him to examine everything. This was the moment. This was when everything should have made sense. Officer Martinez didn't seem rushed. He carefully looked over the paperwork, then checked my driver's license against the address. After a few moments, he examined the front door, where I had already unlocked it with the keys I had been given. Everything seemed to check out. Still, Lana wasn't backing down. She continued her tirade, now saying things like, "This man is stealing. He doesn't belong here. I've lived in this neighborhood for years, and I know this house wasn't sold." I could feel my frustration growing, but I kept my mouth shut. Officer Martinez was handling the situation with the professionalism I had been hoping for. He didn't rush to judgment. He didn't immediately side with anyone. Instead, he just listened to Lana's increasingly dramatic accusations, nodding occasionally but not engaging with her theatrics. Finally, after a few minutes, Officer Martinez turned back to Lana. "Ma'am, I've looked over everything," he said, his tone polite but firm. "I'm afraid I don't see any evidence of a crime here. These documents seem legitimate. The man is within his rights to be here." I could feel a sigh of relief escape my chest. Finally, I thought, finally, this is over. But it wasn't. Not by a long shot. Lana didn't take this news well. In fact, she looked positively enraged. Her face flushed bright red, and her fingers gripped the clipboard so tightly that I thought it might snap in her hands. She opened her mouth, ready to argue, but the officer wasn't having any of it. "I suggest you move along, ma'am," Officer Martinez said, his voice still polite but carrying a certain finality. "You're making a scene, and it's not helping anyone here." Lana's eyes flickered with something that could only be described as disdain. She muttered something under her breath about better background checks and neighborhood security, but she didn't press the issue further. Instead, she turned on her heels and marched away, her red heels clicking against the pavement with a sense of finality that left me feeling uneasy. As she walked away, I couldn't help but notice how the whole scene had unfolded. Here I was, standing in the driveway of my own house, being treated like a criminal, while she, this woman in a red bodysuit and white skirt, was allowed to act with complete authority over something that wasn't hers to control. I thought the worst was over. I thought that once the officer left, things would go back to normal. But as Officer Martinez climbed back into his patrol car, he gave me one last look, as if to say, "This isn't over." He drove off, leaving me standing in the driveway, feeling more exposed than ever. I was about to pick up my TV again when something caught my eye. It was a text from Dave Thompson, the neighbor across the street. I pulled out my phone and read it. "Dude, did they hold casting calls for evil neighbor roles while I wasn't looking?" I couldn't help but laugh, a nervous chuckle that came out of nowhere. It was a small comfort in the face of everything that had happened. At least Dave was able to see the humor in it. Still, the uneasy feeling lingered. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I moved the last of my boxes into the house, trying to shake off the weirdness of the morning, but I couldn't. It felt like something was about to explode, and I wasn't sure how to stop it. The days following that strange confrontation with Lana and Officer Martinez passed in a blur, each one more unsettling than the last. I did my best to keep my head down, unpacking the boxes, setting up my furniture, and trying to feel like this place was actually mine. But every time I stepped outside to tend to something around the house or just get some fresh air, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't just the lingering memory of that absurd moment with Lana in the driveway, or the threat of the police showing up again. It was something deeper, more insidious, a feeling that something, or someone, was lurking just around the corner, waiting to pounce. Then, the next day, it came. The first official notice. I found it tucked into my mailbox, a letter that looked like it came from the HOA. I hesitated before opening it, unsure of what I was about to read. But I didn't have to wait long for the anger to well up in my chest as I scanned the contents. The letterhead was a deep red, with the words Pine Ridge HOA emblazoned across the top. The paper itself was high quality, crisp, and white, making it look official. The typeface was clean and professional, the kind you'd expect from an organization that was serious about property management. But as I read further, the details began to make my stomach turn. The first violation? Unauthorized overnight parking of a commercial vehicle, the U-Haul truck that I had used to move in. The second? A failure to coordinate moving activities with community standards. The letter finished with a final statement that caught my breath. You are required to pay a fine of $750 within 72 hours, or further action will be taken. I was speechless. How could this be happening? There was no HOA in Pine Ridge. I had checked before I bought the house. There were no fees, no governing body, no rules to abide by beyond normal city ordinances. This letter was nothing but a scam, a fake attempt to push me around, to make me pay for something that didn't exist. But what really shocked me wasn't just the audacity of the letter, it was the signature. It was written in bright red marker, like something out of a teenager's diary. Lana Matz, President, was scrawled underneath the bold Pine Ridge HOA title. It was a glaringly amateur move, but somehow, it felt official enough to make me question my own sanity. I took a deep breath, trying to push back the rising panic, but it was already starting to take hold. This wasn't just some overzealous neighbor. Lana was systematically trying to ruin my life. And I had a terrible feeling this was just the beginning. The next few hours felt like a blur. I tried to reach out to other neighbors, but none of them answered. Everyone seemed to be avoiding me, or at least, that's how it felt. I thought about calling the police again, but what could I say? That Lana was sending fake letters demanding I pay an outrageous fine for moving in? No one would believe me. Not yet. As the day stretched on, the isolation began to weigh on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that Lana was orchestrating this whole thing, turning my life into a public spectacle. She had already tried to make me out to be a criminal. Now, she was creating fake fines to make me look like a troublemaker. What was her endgame? It wasn't long before I started to see the first signs that Lana's campaign wasn't just about me. No, she was moving on to bigger targets. I saw it first on social media. Lana had posted a photo of me unloading boxes outside my house, her red and white graphics accompanying the image like some kind of political campaign. The caption read, "Anyone can print documents these days, but no one can replace genuine community spirit and vigilance." I stared at the screen in disbelief. She had created an entire social media post designed to paint me as a suspicious, potentially dangerous person. It felt like a smear campaign, a calculated effort to turn the neighborhood against me. But it wasn't just the post that got to me, it was the video she had filmed outside my house. In the footage, she stood on the sidewalk, holding her phone in front of her like a news reporter, accusing me of suspicious behavior. I could hardly believe it. She had turned my life into content for her twisted little campaign. I felt the weight of the situation settle heavily on my shoulders. The worst part was, it was working. Neighbors who I had never met were starting to message me. Mrs. Patterson, from 2 streets over, sent me a polite but cautious text, "How long have you lived in Pine Ridge?" Another message from someone named Karen, with a similar tone, "Do you have proper documentation for residency?" The suspicion in those words was unmistakable. Lana had planted the seed, and now, it was growing into something dangerous. I had become a target. My past 4 years of hard work and sacrifice seemed like they had been for nothing, and I was quickly realizing that this was only the beginning of Lana's campaign. But what struck me the most wasn't just the harassment. It was the realization that my neighbors were starting to believe her. They were being drawn into her web of lies, each of them becoming a little more suspicious, a little more hesitant. I couldn't stop thinking about it. How had this woman, who had no real power, been able to manipulate a whole neighborhood? How had she been able to make people question me, someone they had never even met, so easily? As the days passed, the harassment continued. More packages went missing from my porch, camera equipment I had ordered for my photography business. I filed reports, but the deliveries kept disappearing, the tracking numbers never quite matching up. I had no proof, but I started to suspect that Lana was somehow behind it. Then came the final straw. One morning, I went outside to find that my trash cans had been knocked over again. But this time, there was something else, something worse. My sprinkler system had been tampered with, redirected to spray water directly onto my windows, leaving unsightly water stains that I had to clean up every morning. It felt like an act of sabotage, small enough to be annoying, but large enough to affect my daily life. I felt my anger start to rise. This wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. This was personal. Lana was actively interfering with my life, trying to sabotage my ability to live peacefully in my own home. But I knew something had to be done. That afternoon, Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman next door, knocked on my door. Her face looked worried, as if she was afraid of what she was about to say. "Come in," I said, trying to mask the frustration in my voice. She stepped inside, looking around nervously as if she were conducting some sort of covert operation. "Honey," she said, lowering her voice, "there's no HOA here. There never has been." I froze. "What?" Mrs. Henderson nodded. "That girl, Lana, she's been pulling this stunt for a while now. She did it to the Thompsons last year. Got them to move out with all her fake violations. And the Martinezes? They lasted 6 months before they couldn't take it anymore." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Lana had been harassing families for months? And no one had said anything? I felt a wave of both anger and disbelief wash over me. How could I not have known this? How had I not seen it earlier? Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice low. "There's no HOA. She's making it all up." That's when it hit me. Lana wasn't just being a nosy neighbor. She was running a con, a full-fledged scam to make people pay fake fines and leave. She wasn't interested in property values or community standards. She was trying to control the entire neighborhood. I realized then that I wasn't just dealing with a crazy neighbor. I was up against something far more dangerous. I had to stop Lana before she destroyed my life, before she destroyed anyone else's. The revelation from Mrs. Henderson hit me like a ton of bricks. "There's no HOA here." The words echoed in my mind as I stood there in my living room, absorbing the enormity of what she had just shared. All this time, I had been under the assumption that Lana was just some overbearing neighbor, but what she was actually doing went far beyond petty interference. She was conducting a full-scale scam, one that had already driven multiple families out of the neighborhood. I couldn't just sit back anymore. I had to fight back. But how? I wasn't a lawyer or a detective. I wasn't even sure where to begin, but I knew this: I had to gather evidence. If I was going to stop Lana and her reign of terror, I had to expose her for what she truly was. I spent the next several days scouring through every scrap of information I could find. I researched HOA regulations in the area, searching for any hint of official documentation about Pine Ridge. But of course, there was nothing. I checked the city's website, but no mention of an HOA. No community guidelines. Nothing that would support Lana's claims. I felt a creeping sense of dread as I realized the extent of her deception. Lana had fabricated an entire HOA, complete with official-looking letters, fines, and fake rules. But more than that, she had somehow convinced several neighbors who had lived here for years, that this organization was real. But it wasn't just her fake HOA that concerned me, it was everything else she had done. Her campaign wasn't just about creating fear. No, it was about control. She had managed to isolate people, to make them question their neighbors, to turn them into passive bystanders in her twisted scheme. And now, she was doing the same to me. The first thing I did was reach out to Dave Thompson. He had been one of Lana's first targets, and I knew he might have valuable information. We met up that afternoon in my living room, and Dave wasted no time getting straight to the point. "She's been doing this for a while now," he said, his tone heavy with frustration. "She's been filing fake complaints against people for months, people who don't even know they're being targeted." I listened intently as Dave continued, explaining how Lana had sent him one of her fake violation letters about 6 months ago, claiming his home office violated residential zoning restrictions. The letter had looked official enough that Dave had called the city to inquire, only to find out that home offices were perfectly legal. It was when he realized Lana had lied to him that he started recording everything he could. He had begun documenting her activities from his office window, capturing hours of footage that painted a damning picture of Lana's obsessive behavior. "She's a piece of work," Dave said, shaking his head. "She's been doing this for so long. It's like she gets off on it, trying to make people's lives miserable." As Dave showed me the footage, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Lana wasn't just creating fake violations, she was also conducting surveillance on her neighbors. She would sneak around at night, measuring lawns, peeking through windows, and taking notes. It was as though she was trying to find some sort of imperfection, something she could use to control or threaten people with. But the most unsettling footage was the video of Lana rehearsing her confrontations. She would stand in her driveway, clipboard in hand, practicing her authority voice as if she were preparing for some sort of showdown. I was stunned. Not only was Lana harassing her neighbors, but she was doing it with such a level of premeditation that it made my skin crawl. This was no mistake. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign, and I was just the latest victim in a long line of targets. I knew then that I had to do more than just defend myself. I had to expose her to everyone, neighbors, authorities, anyone who would listen. But to do that, I needed to make sure I had all the evidence in place. And that meant digging deeper. I started gathering everything I could: pictures, video footage, and copies of all the fake violation letters she had sent. The more I gathered, the more I realized how extensive Lana's operation really was. She wasn't just harassing people on a whim, she was systematically targeting specific families, exploiting their vulnerabilities to push them out of the neighborhood. I started to get a clearer picture of her methods. According to Mrs. Henderson, Lana had driven the Thompsons out of the neighborhood by filing false complaints about unpermitted construction. She had claimed that their deck violated zoning laws, causing the Thompsons to spend thousands of dollars on legal fees and inspections to prove they hadn't done anything wrong. By the time they finally cleared the issue up, they had lost so much money, and so much peace of mind, that they sold their house at a significant loss just to escape her. The Martinez family had been her next target. Lana had somehow convinced their mortgage company that they were running an illegal business out of their home. They had to hire both a lawyer and a CPA to prove that Mr. Martinez's home-based accounting practice was legitimate. The investigation nearly cost them their home loan, and the stress of the whole ordeal had caused irreparable damage to their lives. As I put the pieces together, I began to see how Lana had been systematically destroying lives. The more I uncovered, the more determined I became to make sure she couldn't do this to anyone else. She had already caused so much damage, and now she was coming after me. But I wasn't going to let her win. I reached out to a friend of mine who had become a lawyer. He had always been the one to give me legal advice when things got complicated. When I explained Lana's actions, he listened carefully, and then he told me something that shifted everything. "Impersonating a homeowners association is fraud," he said bluntly. "And if she's been collecting fines from people based on fake violation notices, she's committing consumer fraud. If what you're telling me is true, this could escalate to criminal charges: stalking, fraud, harassment, you name it." The weight of his words hit me like a freight train. Lana wasn't just a nuisance. She was a criminal. And if I was going to stop her, I had to do it the right way. With my friend's help, I began to document everything. Every letter, every social media post, every instance of harassment. It was time to build a case. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore, I was fighting for the whole neighborhood. The hours I spent compiling evidence, researching legal actions, and talking to neighbors began to feel like I was preparing for a battle I didn't want to fight, but knew I had to. With every new piece of information, the weight of Lana's deception grew heavier, and the sense of urgency inside me intensified. I knew that I couldn't let her continue destroying lives, especially after learning how deeply she had hurt the Thompsons and the Martinezes. She had caused so much chaos, manipulating the neighborhood with her fake HOA, issuing fines, creating division, and forcing people out of their homes. If I didn't do something now, she would keep going, on, creating the kind of turmoil that would ruin Pine Ridge for everyone. After everything I had learned, there was no way I could back down. I had to stop Lana before she ruined anyone else's life. It was time to confront her, not just for my sake, but for the entire neighborhood. I organized everything carefully: documentation, pictures, video footage, and testimonies from my neighbors. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about exposing the truth and stopping a woman who had turned her need for control into a full-scale scam. I had one shot at this, and I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The community center meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7 p.m. It was Lana's big moment, the culmination of her carefully orchestrated campaign to control Pine Ridge, to make everyone believe she had authority when, in fact, she had none. I knew she would be putting on a show, dressed to the nines in her signature red and white, creating an illusion of importance. And as much as I wanted to prepare myself emotionally, I also knew that it was important to stay focused. The day of the meeting, I changed into something simple but professional: navy blazer, white dress shirt, and khaki pants. I needed to appear competent, someone who belonged in this conversation. This wasn't a costume party, it was a serious discussion. As I walked into the community center, I noticed that some of my neighbors had already arrived. They were seated around long tables, some in casual clothes, others in more formal attire, unaware of the bombshell that was about to be dropped. Then, she walked in. Lana was in her element. She had chosen a red cocktail dress, a white blazer, and had accessorized with a small portable speaker that began playing what sounded like corporate presentation music as she made her way to the front of the room. She carried herself like she was preparing for a corporate event, the kind of performance you'd expect at a board meeting or an important business conference. The contrast between her elaborate setup and the casual atmosphere of the room was stark. The table she set up was covered in red folders, white folders, a laptop perfectly placed in front of her, and even a vase filled with red and white flowers. The entire setup screamed authority, even though I knew it was all smoke and mirrors. I stood at the back of the room, quietly setting up my laptop and connecting to the projector. I wasn't going to let her control this narrative. As soon as the room was dark, the contrast between her colorful, dramatic presentation and my clean, professional slides became evident. I had spent hours creating a presentation that would expose her for what she truly was, nothing more than a fraud. I wasn't just going to tell my side of the story. I was going to show it. I clicked on the first slide and began projecting the security footage I had gathered over the past few weeks. Footage of Lana's late-night trash inspections, her measuring rituals in full business attire, and her rehearsals of confrontations with imaginary adversaries. The room fell silent. For the first time, my neighbors saw Lana's behavior for what it really was. It wasn't just obsessive, it was calculated. I could feel the tension shift in the room as my neighbors began to realize they had been manipulated for months. Lana's performance was no longer convincing, it was crumbling in front of their eyes. I showed them more: the fake violation notices, the red signatures she had used to intimidate us, and her fabricated social media posts. The more I revealed, the more I saw the shock and disbelief on the faces of the people in the room. It was hard to watch, but it was necessary. They needed to see the truth. When I showed the footage of Lana rehearsing her confrontational, authority voice in my driveway, the room collectively gasped. Even Sandra from 3 houses down, who had initially defended Lana, spoke up. "I believed her," she said, her voice trembling. "She told me my fence was too high. I almost paid for a survey I didn't need." It was as though the floodgates had opened. One by one, neighbors began to share their own experiences, their own stories of Lana's harassment. Mrs. Patterson, who had been one of Lana's strongest supporters, admitted that she had received fake violation notices too. Her expression was one of embarrassment, realizing how easily she had been manipulated. Then, I did something that shifted everything. I brought out the official legal documentation, city ordinances, legitimate HOA guidelines, and procedures for establishing a homeowners association. I placed them side by side with Lana's fake documents, pointing out every flaw, every inconsistency. The difference between real authority and Lana's performance was so clear that it left no room for doubt. "Here's how you really form an HOA," I said, addressing the crowd. "Here's what a legitimate violation notice looks like. This is the proper legal language, with official seals and signatures. What Lana has been presenting to you? It's all fake. None of this is real." The impact was immediate. The room, which had once been divided, was now united in a shared understanding. Lana's facade had completely collapsed. And it wasn't just the documents that did it, it was the realization that they had been living under the weight of her lies, her manipulation. Lana's reaction was exactly what I expected. She tried to argue, her voice quivering as she clutched her red folder, but it was too late. The truth was out. She started crying, more theatrically than anything else, as she accused me of faking everything, of being a danger to the community. But her protests fell on deaf ears. Neighbors were no longer afraid of her, they were angry. Officer Martinez arrived just in time to back me up. He explained the legal implications of Lana's actions: fraud, harassment, stalking. It was over for her. There was no escape now. The meeting ended with a vote of no confidence. The entire community saw through her, and they chose to stand with each other rather than with someone who had been trying to tear them apart. As Lana gathered her things, her red heels clicking across the floor, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. This nightmare was over. But even as I watched Lana leave, I knew that her legacy would linger in Pine Ridge for a long time. She had caused irreparable damage, but in the end, the community had come together. What she had tried to destroy had only grown stronger. Months passed, and things began to settle. I started to feel a sense of peace in my new home. The neighborhood was healing, and I could see it in the way people interacted with each other, genuinely, without the shadow of Lana hanging over them. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And as for Lana, she disappeared, fading into the background of Pine Ridge like a ghost story. The red and white outfits became a warning, a symbol of what can happen when someone demands power they haven't earned. And so, my journey in Pine Ridge began. It wasn't the peaceful beginning I had imagined, but it was a new chapter, one that I was determined to make my own. With that said, thanks for reading, and until next time.